London, the 1880s, 80,000 women working in the sex trade. Police reports, doctors' notes, and charity records tell the same story: debt traps, forced examinations, children sold, and evidence destroyed whenever it pointed to the wrong people. The respectable classes built fortunes on rent from brothels while preaching purity in Parliament. A lot of what happened stayed buried in sealed archives and censored photographs for a century. I'm going to share 20 facts from the records they tried to burn. Subscribe to our channel for videos like this every week. The Victorian age ran on more than coal and cotton. Number 1. In 1857, a police estimate put the number of prostitutes in London alone at around 80,000. That is not a guess from reformers trying to shock Parliament. That was the Metropolitan Police doing a head count, 1 in every 16 women of working age. What the statistics did not capture was the economics behind it. For every woman working, there was a landlord collecting rent, a pub owner selling gin, a doctor charging for examinations, and a constable taking a weekly payment to look the other way. The trade was not hidden in the shadows. It was woven into the city's economy like any other industry. Number 2, in Victorian London, the hierarchy of the sex trade was as rigid as the class system itself. At the top were the courtesans of the Haymarket, women who rode in carriages, wore silk, and entertained gentlemen in private houses. Newspapers called them pretty horsebreakers because they showed up in Hyde Park alongside the aristocracy. A few rungs down were the women working in accommodation houses, establishments that rented rooms by the hour and asked no questions. Below them were the streetwalkers of the West End, charging a few shillings for a quick encounter in a doorway or alley. And at the bottom were the penny gaffs of the East End, where the price dropped to whatever a dock worker had left after payday. The clients moved between these worlds depending on their wallet. The women rarely moved up. Number 3, the money did not just flow to the women. In most cases, it barely touched their hands. Landlords charged double or triple the normal rent for rooms used in the trade, knowing the women could not complain. Pub owners took a cut for allowing solicitation on their premises. Pimps, called bullies in the slang of the time, collected protection fees. And then there were the dress house madams, who ran a system that looked almost identical to indentured servitude. A woman would arrive with nothing. The house would provide clothes, lodging, food, and a small advance. All of it went into a ledger. The fees added up faster than the earnings. A woman could work for years and never clear her debt. The records from charity organizations show women who owed more after 5 years than when they started. Number 4, the police knew everything and did very little. In theory, solicitation was illegal. In practice, enforcement depended on who was paying whom. Constables walked regular beats through known areas and collected weekly payments from brothel keepers to ensure no raids happened. When a crackdown did come, it was usually because someone important had complained, or because an election was coming and politicians needed to look moral. The women got arrested. The landlords and madams rarely did. Court records from the 1860s show the same names appearing over and over, fined a few shillings and released the same afternoon. One magistrate noted that the fines had become just another cost of doing business, like rent or coal. Number 5. London gets most of the attention, but the trade flourished in every industrial city, port town, and garrison town across Britain. In Manchester and Liverpool, factory girls earning starvation wages sometimes turned to part-time work in the evenings just to pay rent. In Portsmouth and Plymouth, naval bases created entire districts dedicated to entertaining sailors on shore leave. In garrison towns like Aldershot, the army quietly tolerated brothels near the barracks because the alternative was soldiers causing trouble in respectable neighborhoods. Local authorities looked the other way as long as the money kept moving and the business stayed in its designated streets. Reformers occasionally published reports documenting the scale, But nothing much changed. The economic logic was too strong. Landlords collected rents, publicans sold drinks, doctors charged for treatments, and the women at the center of it all rarely saw a way out. Parliamentary committees took testimony, expressed concern, and moved on to other matters. The empire preached morality abroad while the ledgers at home told a different story. Number 6. In 1864, Parliament passed the first of the Contagious Diseases Acts. The stated goal was controlling syphilis and gonorrhea in military towns. The method was simple and brutal. Any woman suspected of being a prostitute could be stopped by plainclothes police, forced to register, and subjected to an internal examination by a military surgeon. If she refused, she went to prison. If she was found infected, she was locked in a hospital until doctors decided she was cured. The men who used her services were never examined, never registered, never questioned. The logic was clear in the parliamentary debates. Soldiers and sailors were valuable to the empire. The women were not. Reformers called the examinations instrumental rape. The government called it public health. Number 7. The lock hospitals where infected women were held became prisons in all but name. Women could be detained for months without trial, without appeal, and without any clear discharge date. Charity workers who visited these institutions described women with gray skin and missing teeth, waiting for release that might never come. The records were kept in hospital archives, most of which were later destroyed or sealed. Inside, the treatments were experimental at best. Mercury compounds, applied internally and externally, caused tooth loss, tremors, and sometimes madness. Arsenic preparations burned the skin and damaged organs. Some doctors used the captive population to test new methods, recording results in medical journals that never mentioned consent. Number 8. The age of consent in England was 12 until 1875. Then Parliament raised it to 13. That was the legal protection offered. In practice, child prostitution operated openly in certain districts of London. Procurers recruited girls from workhouses, orphanages, and poor families with promises of domestic work. Once a girl was in a house, the same debt system applied. By the time she understood what was happening, she already owed money for clothes and lodging. In 1885, the journalist W.T. Stead published a series called The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon. He documented how easily a child could be purchased in London. He bought a 13-year-old girl himself to prove the point, and went to prison for it. The resulting scandal finally pushed Parliament to raise the age of consent to 16. The records from Stead's investigation were considered so disturbing that they were kept from general circulation for decades. Number 9. The children who were born to women in the trade faced their own horrors. Unwanted pregnancies were common, and the options were limited. Some women turned to baby farmers, people who took infants for a lump sum and promised to find them homes. In reality, many of these babies were simply left to die of neglect or killed outright. In 1896, Amelia Dyer was arrested after bodies of infants started washing up in the Thames, each strangled with white tape. She had been operating for over 20 years. Police estimated she killed at least 300 babies, possibly more. Court records showed she had been investigated before and let go. The system knew the children were simply not worth protecting. She was hanged, but dozens of similar operations continued across the country. Number 10. While the poor faced examinations in lock hospitals, the wealthy operated by different rules entirely. Accommodation houses in respectable neighborhoods catered to gentlemen who wanted privacy. A man could rent a room by the hour, bring a woman, and leave without anyone recording his name. The staff were paid for discretion. When police did raid these establishments, the owners usually had enough warning to clear out the clients. Court records occasionally mention prominent names, followed by a note that charges were dropped or files were sealed. The double standard was built into the system. A working-class woman could be arrested for standing on a street corner. A gentleman could visit a house in St. John's Wood and face no consequences at all. Number 11. Some wealthy men skipped the accommodation houses entirely and kept mistresses in private residences. The kept woman was a recognized category in Victorian society with her own rules and expectations. A gentleman would rent a house, furnish it, provide an allowance, and visit when convenient. The arrangement might last years. The woman gained financial security but lost her reputation permanently. If the man died or lost interest, she had no legal claim on anything. Some of these women later wrote memoirs that shocked readers with their frankness. Publishers printed them in small runs and sold them under the counter. What the public never saw was how many of these relationships began when the women were barely past childhood. The records that survived came from estate sales and attic discoveries decades later. Number 12. For men who wanted variety without commitment, pleasure gardens offered procurement alongside entertainment. Cremorne Gardens in Chelsea drew crowds for fireworks, dancing, and concerts. After dark, the atmosphere shifted. Women circulated through the grounds, and private walks became meeting places for negotiations. Police knew what happened there, but rarely intervened because the gardens paid their licensing fees and attracted spending visitors. When reformers finally forced Cremorne to close in 1877, the trade simply moved elsewhere. The pattern repeated across London's entertainment districts. The money kept moving. The names changed. The business continued. Number 13. Police corruption went beyond weekly bribes. In some districts, officers actively participated in the trade. Court testimony from the 1880s describes constables who acted as collectors for brothel keepers, taking a percentage of earnings in exchange for advance warning about raids. When investigations got too close to naming names, files disappeared from precinct offices. One inspector who tried to document the system found himself transferred to a rural posting within weeks. The pattern was consistent. Low-level women got arrested to fill quotas. The people running the operations stayed protected. And whenever a scandal threatened to expose the arrangements, someone made sure the paperwork got lost. Number 14. In the autumn of 1888, 5 women were murdered in Whitechapel. All 5 were sex workers. The newspapers called the killer Jack the Ripper and turned the case into a sensation. What got less attention was how the investigation treated the victims. Police records described them primarily as fallen women, their deaths regrettable but somehow inevitable given their profession. Evidence handling was inconsistent. Witness statements contradicted each other. When the murder stopped, the case went cold. Files related to the investigation were sealed until 1992. When researchers finally accessed them, pages were missing. Whether that was incompetence or deliberate concealment, the effect was the same. The women remained statistics. The killer remained a mystery. Number 15. For women who wanted to leave the trade, the options were limited and often worse than staying. Magdalene asylums, run by religious organizations, promised redemption and a fresh start. The reality was unpaid labor in commercial laundries, locked doors, and children taken away at birth. In Ireland, these institutions operated into the late 20th century. Women who entered as teenagers sometimes stayed for decades. The records from these asylums show a system designed less for rescue than for punishment and profit. Laundry contracts with hotels and hospitals generated income. The women saw none of it. When survivors began speaking publicly in the 1990s, the scale of the abuse finally reached mainstream attention. By then, most of the perpetrators were dead, and the institutions had quietly closed. Number 16. In the 1880s and the 1890s, a panic over white slavery swept through Britain and Europe. Newspapers published lurid stories about innocent girls kidnapped and sold to foreign brothels. Some of the trafficking was real. Criminal networks did move women across borders. But the panic also mixed genuine concern with a xenophobia and exaggeration. Investigations focused heavily on foreign-born procurers while ignoring domestic operations run by British subjects. The resulting legislation gave police broad new powers, and those powers were often used against the women themselves rather than the traffickers. Records from immigration archives show deportations of foreign-born sex workers who had technically been victims. The system claimed to protect women while punishing them for their circumstances. Number 17. The Victorian era also saw the birth of commercial pornography. Early photography created new possibilities, and entrepreneurs moved quickly. Images circulated through private networks, were sold in shops that officially traded in other goods, and were shipped by mail to subscribers. Some photographs featured women from the trade who were paid a few shillings for a session. Others were more disturbing. Collections that surfaced decades later included images of children. Police occasionally raided studios and seized materials, but prosecutions were rare and penalties light. The archives of these seizures sat in evidence rooms for years before being destroyed, usually without any record of what they contained. Number 18. At the top of the Victorian trade sat women like Mary Jeffries, who operated houses that served aristocrats, politicians, and according to persistent rumors, members of the royal household. When she was finally arrested in 1885, the trial became a controlled demolition. Charges were reduced. Witnesses failed to appear. Jeffries paid a fine of £200 and walked free. Newspapers reported that her client list had been suppressed to protect important names. The records that might have confirmed this were never made public. She continued operating for years afterward, untouched by further prosecution. The message was clear. The law applied differently depending on who your customers were. Number 19. Much of what historians know about Victorian prostitution comes from sources that almost did not survive. Charity workers kept case files that ended up in attics. Doctors published observations in medical journals that went out of print. Court transcripts sat in basement storage until archivists found them decades later. The most detailed account came from an anonymous 11-volume memoir called My Secret Life, written by a wealthy man documenting his encounters over 40 years. For generations, libraries refused to catalog it. Copies circulated privately among collectors. Number 20. The Victorians built the modern world, and they buried the receipts. Archives were purged, photographs were burned, court records were sealed for a century or quietly lost. What survives came through accidents, attic discoveries, and the stubbornness of researchers who refused to accept official silence. Even now, files remain classified in government storage. The empire that lectured the world about civilization kept its own ledgers carefully hidden, and that says a lot about what history chooses to remember.